Welcome to the PowerShell Podcast, the podcast for PowerShell and the PowerShell community.
Far more powerful than all the others.
And now, here's your hosts, Jordan Hammond and Andrew Plough.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the PowerShell Podcast. I'm host Jordan with other co-host, special awesome person, Andrew Plough. And today we have guest Dave Stein, who's going to talk us through some PowerShell knowledge today.
Put him on the spot. Yeah, teach us everything you know. We have about 90 minutes here, so
no pressure. But I want to be able to completely automate my environment by the end of this 90 minutes.
We take Visa, MasterCard.
There you go. If money's no object, everything's possible.
It's almost true, yeah. Love money and time.
Definitely. So what do you do for a day job? Because there's some topics I want to cover that relate to that later.
Oh, sure. So I work for a company now called Quisitive, but it was called Catapult Systems. We got, depending on how you look at it, merged or acquired. About equal size companies, so we're now double in size. And we're a Microsoft partner, so we cover, as a company, we cover almost everything Microsoft has, everything from Power Platform, Power BI, Dynamics, Azure, M365, Windows on-prem infrastructure, System Center, or what was System Center, and a lot of SharePoint. We have like a pretty large SharePoint development side of things. And where I work within that is somewhere between, it's hard to explain, because I'm kind of a dotted line situation there. So I technically work in the Azure Managed Services group, which is kind of like managed services for Azure, if that makes sense. So we take care of customers' Azure environments, resources, platforms, operations, stuff like that. And I work in a group that's associated to that does automation. And there's two groups within that. There's the monitoring and alerting side, and then there's the process automation side. And I'm kind of in both of those, but I spend probably more time on the automation process side. And most of that is user onboard, offboard change type stuff.
Awesome.
The automation side is always the best side.
Yeah, until you work yourself out of a job. It's all done. Okay.
Have you had that happen before?
No, not well. I mean, you move on. It's like, it depends on, each customer has like their own thing they want to automate. So when you get that done, you move on to the next thing, either something else at that customer or other customers have other things. So there's always something new.
Awesome. So that's your work life, but where does your community involvement play into things for you?
Keeping my sanity. I have to have a project going all the time or I'd lose my mind. I'll start staring at the wall and then getting cranky to my wife. And, it's like a mental cabin fever kind of thing. So, yeah, that's why, you'll see my repos are full of a lot of old stuff and always spinning up something new just to see if it goes anywhere. And some of them do, some don't, but it's fun to work on stuff. It's like having a home project. So I do some of those too. Having a house never ends. Woodworking, things like that. I dabble in that. So yeah, community involvement, just dabbling on stuff. Sitting in on user groups. So I do like a lot of user groups. Some that I tend to frequent more than others just because of the schedule. Not really because I, hate anybody and love anybody else. I like them all, but a lot of times your meetings are just not when I can join. Which unfortunately seems to happen a lot depending on time of year. Research Triangle PowerShell group, I joined that one a lot. There's some others. There's a Northwest one. There's a New York users group. There's a Mississippi one. There's a Chattanooga one. There's an Arizona group. I think these are all on meetup.com or event. What's the other one?
Eventbrite.
Eventbrite, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so those I tend to try to frequent those and pick up something new, contribute if I can. Sometimes just a peanut gallery in the chat, but just to be involved.
Awesome. For me, I'm super excited to have you here because for me, what you represent is just this positive, confident, easygoing guy who's using PowerShell and just kind of, it doesn't seem like you have it all figured out, but I just really enjoy what you represent. You're always doing something, pushing things forward.
Well, thank you. Way higher than I would explain myself, but hey, I appreciate that. Thank you. Wow.
Yeah, I definitely categorize you as that. And so do you feel confident? Because, doing this podcast so often, we talk to a lot of guests and some, a lot of people we look up to, we think they have it all figured out. But for you, do you feel confident? Because I'm just saying, from what I'm seeing on Twitter, I'm like, man, I need to be more like Skatterbrainzz. Like this guy, he's just in the moment, doing things, posting what's going on.
That's a good question. So, most of what I do on Twitter is talking about everything but technology lately. But it depends on what I'm working on. We had a discussion with one of my coworkers, I think last week, about this, how there's sort of this weird perception of do you know PowerShell, quote unquote. Do you know PowerShell? And it's like, it's kind of a weird question because there's knowing PowerShell and knowing what to do with it. And to me, it's kind of like having a tool set. It's like, yeah, I know my ratchets and my sockets really well, but do I know how to use that on an airplane versus a car? It depends on what you're doing with it. So like in some areas, I feel better, like on-prem stuff, Windows platform, some SQL, things like that, applications, traditional sysadmin type stuff. Feel pretty good about that because I've been doing it for about, I don't know, since 1842 or whatever. But some areas I'm not that confident in. Like I'm still getting used to Exchange because I never was an Exchange admin. So I got kind of pushed into that. Okay, you got to fix this person's mailbox or figure out why these things aren't applying. And then, okay, how do I do that? Go dive in and figure it out. And, thank God there's A, documents, and B, Google. And then there's coworkers. So I lean on my coworkers a lot. We have a great team. I really am like in a group of people that I have to struggle to keep up with. They're some of the brightest people I've ever worked around. So I'm real lucky in that regard. So as far as how confident I feel, like I said, it depends on the situation. Some areas I feel like, okay, I've seen this before. I can jump in and do something. And sometimes not. And you just kind of have to roll with that and go as far as you can. And sometimes you have to throw in the towel and say, it's out of my wheelhouse. I need someone else. And that's the nice thing about working in a consulting team is you can do that. So yeah, I've been pretty lucky in that regard.
So one thing I'm learning is I'm odd in a lot of ways, but perhaps the strangest thing about me was I was genuinely excited to take over Exchange. And the more people I talk to that touched it, it's always like, oh, I was forced into this. I hate it. And I genuinely loved it. So I didn't think of it this way, but I think enjoying my time as an Exchange admin might be the oddest thing about me at this point.
It's funny you say that because the more I've been interfacing with it, I guess, I don't know if that's the right word, I'm starting to appreciate it more. I just remember back in the day when they were first moving to Exchange Online, how many people were complaining about this, that, and the other. And I was like, man, I'm so glad I don't work with Exchange. And I'll never forget one of my coworkers made a joke one day. I kept saying that we had like a series of meetings because we were having some big project migrating everything. And all they was, oh my God, we're going to have to be here over the weekend. We're going to be late at night, working through the holidays, some huge migration thing. And I would say the same thing every time. So glad I don't work with Exchange. And finally he turned around and he said, you will.
So I was the driving force preventing my company's move to an online version to Office Exchange 365, mostly because in the early days you didn't have access to things like hub transport and critical roles, just because it was all lumped together. So you'd have some basic control, but I needed, for various reasons, more access that I couldn't get. So I was always blocking it. But the moment I left that company, they went there like the next day, I think.
Yeah, and I understand that. And that same kind of thing's happening with Config Manager and Intune. There's a lot of parallels there. Active Directory and Azure AD, that's another one where you get some new things, but you give up a lot of old things. And then there's that constant struggle of, I need those old things, and they don't want to move. Sometimes they can't, sometimes they just don't want to. Yeah, it's always seems like a repeating thing. But
Right.
yeah.
As a consultant, what is up with Microsoft's naming practices? I mean, what's up, man?
Paint fumes. I don't know. I don't know. I don't have really any insight inside the company. I mean, I know a lot of people who work there, but it's like, hey, what's up? It's not like, hey, let's sit down and talk about your life inside of Microsoft. So I really don't have any magical insight. But from the outside, it seems like they spend way too much time on it, especially when they have a good name and they ruin it. I mean, there was nothing wrong with Flow. I mean, come on, Flow. Everybody was still calling it Flow for another year or two. Some people still do.
Maybe it's something like they do all of their coding and everything at the top line of the Balmer curve, and then at the negative part where things go bad, that's just like, all right, start naming some stuff.
Sometimes they just, like, I don't know, they just wander into the room with a pitcher of beer and they go, we're renaming everything. Like endpoint management. Holy cow, that one's like, I don't know. I just told them I'm just going to call it config manager. I don't care what they wrap around it, because they changed it again. What, like 2 months ago? I don't know.
Follow-up question. How much, like what percentage of your brain do you have to dedicate to keeping all these different names of products, the current, the past? When you're searching it, you got to look up all the different types. As a consultant, do you just have it all as part of your working memory, or do you have to constantly remind yourself?
For some products, maybe, but for, oddly enough, when I Google something, I still get better results. David James would hit me right now, using SCCM in the list of keywords. Yeah. If I put config manager, like config MGR or configuration manager, I don't get the same quality of hits as I do if I put like PowerShell, SCCM, add devices to collection. Something, that in that sort of descending, what is it, taxonomy? Is that the word? Yeah, it's like, so I hold on to those because they still work. Now for newer products, when they change the name to Defender something or other, yeah, I mean, you got to go with that. But that Defender team is, wow.
Yeah. I just had to ask those questions for everyone out there dealing with all these different product names. A lot of times we interview people from Microsoft and wouldn't really want to ask too many aggressive questions about that. But, those names, for me as a sysadmin who would work on a project for a short period of time and maybe not touch it for another year between all these different products. And so I didn't have them always in my memory. Such a pain in the tail to constantly have to remind yourself and then communicate with your team. And then you have meetings and then not everyone knows the right word. And then you got to, yeah.
Yeah. I'm just hoping they don't rename PowerShell.
I think that was pretty locked in.
Well, we had our moments, didn't we?
Yeah. There used to be that spinning wheel thing where they'd have like active, live, one, power, you'd put together the words to figure out the product name. We're like, okay, what would PowerShell become? Active shell? I think somebody has that. They have to go with live shell or one shell.
PowerShell core. Anyways,
yeah.
PowerShell, Windows PowerShell.
But all those still contain PowerShell. I can't imagine that change is coming.
Hope not.
We'll have to rename our podcast.
Yeah, that would be terrible. A lot of user groups. Oh man, tons of swag for all these meetings. Oh my goodness, that'd be a tough one.
Yeah, what if they just rebrand it? They don't say it's still PowerShell. They just call it the shell instead of power, and then re-release it.
Oh man, I hope I'm not watching this.
No.
Yeah, I don't know.
So,
I don't know.
I have a question. So, as a consultant, what tips do you have? Because in IT, a lot of times people will work with consultants, right? That's kind of like what you do. What tips do you have for people when they are working with consultants to make sure maybe you get things done more efficiently, maybe some traps that customers will fall into if they're not very experienced with working with consultants?
Yeah, that's a good question. So be very clear about what you want. Be very clear what your expectations are. Like when you say, I want this fixed, define what fixed is. And it might sound trivial, but it's really important because a lot of times that's probably where a lot of the friction comes from, is one side assumes that this set of things constitutes the fix, but the customer had a whole different idea of what fix means. And then they have a falling out at the end of that. And it could have been avoided if they just upfront said, to me, fixed means this, and itemize it. Even if it's a short bullet list. Yeah,
As a consultant, are you ever proactive about that? Like, hey, let's determine before we get into an engagement that this is what needs to be done to be considered successful.
Yeah, and most of the consultants I work with do. It's a CYA thing. Most places that do consulting have this kind of a common process, right? So you have your initial discussion with like the salesperson. They bring in like a project manager or an account person and maybe a technical person to kind of line up, okay, like a list of ingredients or an action list of things that are going to be done. And then they take that and develop the SAL, right? The statement of work. And then working to that statement of work, sometimes you find that as you dive in, there were things missed in that statement of work. That's real common. It happens almost everywhere. It's like, oh, well, they mentioned this, but they didn't say anything about that. Or they mentioned this, but it's really not related to that kind of thing. So all kinds of weird little things can fall into place. So you still have to do some active follow-up after that statement of work. There's usually a kickoff call that goes over that with the customer. Like, here's what we signed, make sure everybody's cool with this and have everybody on the call, right? So usually an all hands thing for whoever's related. And they go down the list of things, the timelines, who's going to need access to what, how do you go about getting access, all that kind of stuff. And then, how often they're going to do status check-ins, weekly, monthly, daily, whatever, and all that. And a lot of times people think that that's a one-time thing and they're done, but depending on the scale of the project and what's going on, you may have to revisit that several times because those things can change. And if it's a well-written style, it'll build that in. It'll have some verbiage that says, some things can be modified as things go. It might be a change order or some terminology like that. Or something that just further clarifies a vague statement. Like I want, accounts added. Okay, well, how many accounts? What kind of accounts? That kind of thing. That comes up with a lot of things. Device endpoint management, that's real common. Applications, it's real common because there's a lot of areas where those can go in the weeds that from the start usually aren't lined up really clear. Like I need 5 apps deployed, or I need a process to automate X. So to bring it back to the automation side, need a process to automate what's a common one? Active Directory cleanup. Okay, so we want to be able to get rid of stale accounts, but we need a process that identifies them, handles them, logs them. So we have a track record of what happened and when, that kind of thing. It's real important to get those details lined up. And I see a lot of times, not so much at our place, but at places I've worked at elsewhere, they'll forget to ask questions like, well, how many days do you consider a device dormant to be stale, quote unquote? You might come in thinking, well, all my other customers is, 60 days, 90 days. This customer's like, oh no, we want 180 days. So stuff like that.
How often do you run into a situation where the customer knows what they want, but the way they want to go about it isn't efficient? Do you get a lot of pushback as like, we can do it this way, it's better, and you just end up doing it the way they want over the best way? Or do you tend to, I guess, be able to make the case to do what's best?
That varies a lot. That varies by personality. So like every customer you deal with, you get a different mix of people. And some customers are wonderful. I mean, they're just like, hey, you guys are the experts. We'll go with whatever you tell us. There's a lot of that. So, and that's great when they're really willing to work with you and they hand you the wheel and here's the keys. And they just want to be on the calls to see how things work, which I prefer. I don't like I'll work alone if I have to, or if they want me to, but I prefer to work in tandem with the client. That way, when we're done, they know what we did, how it was done, because I may part ways with them for months, maybe forever. And then when somebody has to revisit that, I'm not going to remember all the details unless I dig up the docs. But it's important that they know it because they're the ones that have to live with it, right? So, so for those customers, it works great. There's other customers where, yeah, they dig their heels in and they want it their way, even if it's not the right way. And there's some common examples of that. When they ignore the quote unquote best practices, even the ones published by Microsoft, like your recommendations, best practices, like, we know better. You know, those happen. And you kind of work with them and explain to them politely, tactfully, that, you know, if you go that route, you may lack support. You know, you may call for help and they're going to say, sorry, you know, you went the wrong way, can't help you now. And that usually gets them back on the trail. Sometimes it's a matter of they're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. That happens a lot with keeping current on things. So we still have customers out there that run old versions of operating systems and some applications. And it's not because they don't want to, it's because, you know, their upper management won't stroke the check for the licensing. That happens quite a bit. So then it becomes another discussion where I'll reach back on our side to our account manager and see if they can work anything out with Microsoft to help them over that hump, you know. And sometimes they can find some, what do they call it? Microsoft has those programs for, like, you know, not early adopters, but oh my goodness, I'm drawing a total blank. It's not fast track, but one of those kind of programs where they help you like pilot something to get on board with it, like piloting a new product usually. And those will ramp up and ramp down as the product gains traction. So when they're early on in the phase, they'll do really aggressive support. Like, here's, you know, X number of dollars to help you get 20% of your users over to Azure, right? Or M365 or onto Intune, things like that. So if it's a new product that can help, so we'll try to find different angles to help them get over that hump of saying we can't go there. Well, here's we help you get there. So we try to help them get there. I don't, I'm really talking in circles.
No, it sounds like from what you've said, communication is super important, from establishing the expectations with customers off the bat, and also for kind of teaching them whatever solution you implement and making sure they understand the work that's done and are set up for success long term. Yeah,
that's very true. Sometimes they want us to stay involved. Like, so the team I'm on now, the AMS team, so we're basically a managed services for their Azure environment. So we stay on board with them, and we're basically their second arm to keep things moving, right? Or let them know, hey, you've got some issues here. Do we have your permission to go and do this? You know, add resources, ramp things up, change a configuration, all sorts of things. So there's different ways to engage. So sometimes, you know, it's in our hands more than not, but it varies. It varies a lot by customer and by contract.
So another question here. So you mentioned you've been in IT since 1842. So I'm a bit newer. I only have about 10 years of experience. And I've learned some things over that time. I was a manager briefly. And I'm just wondering with you, and where does being a manager fit into your career? Have you ever been a manager? Do you enjoy being an individual contributor? Do you still find mentorship opportunities? How do you kind of view that?
I have not been a official manager with people under me. It's kind of a funny story. Well, it's not really funny. In one of my past jobs, I was actually an IT business systems manager. That was my title, but I had nobody under me. And when I asked about it, they were like, "Did you manage the business system?" I was like, "Oh, okay, all right." So I talked to computers. So no, I haven't managed people officially. I have done some ad hoc management when I was doing software development years ago. I used to have a team of developers, and for a project that I'd started, and I needed help, so I brought in people I knew. It was really basically a group of friends that I worked with at the company that had a need to leverage that same thing. So it just kind of worked out organically, but I had no like official management over them. It was dotted line really. But mentorship, Yeah. We do a fair amount of that internally, actually back and forth. There's a lot of, it's very, it's a term, reciprocal. So I do mentor a lot of people on PowerShell, and I don't want to make that sound like I'm an expert because I don't consider myself an expert. In fact, I'm sitting here staring at a chat window on Teams right now with people I consider to be like miles above me, and it's give and take. And once in a while, I'll show them something they didn't know, but most of the time, it's them showing me something I didn't know. But for people that come to me with a problem, say I need a PowerShell script to do X, Y, Z, I'll sit down and not just code it for them. I'd rather have them type it out and just kind of talk through why we're going about this way. Why are we doing a for each loop? Why are we making this a function? Why would you want to make that a variable instead of just hard coded? It's just really basic stuff. And I've got a pretty good track record right now because it's kind of an inside joke. Most of the people come to me and they go, I'm not a scripter. I hear that all the time. And I'll show them something, and because it's something they need and they want to do, like, I've got to fix this problem. Oh my God, I've got to fix this problem. All right, well, here's a way to do it. Okay, they run off with it. And then a month later, they show me what they've done, and it's mind blowing. Like, you are a scripter. And one of them still says he's not, but I know he is. So, yeah, it feels good to do that. It feels good to watch people take off and run with it. A lot of them turn around and show me stuff I didn't know, which is really cool.
You're out here empowering people, man. That's awesome. I have had some similar experiences, and it's a little bit addictive.
Yeah.
Like, I enjoy writing PowerShell solutions myself, but I would much rather take the opportunity for some of the like easier to low level projects to do what you said, because it sounds like you're basically pair programming with them. They kind of do the coding, and you use pair programming to kind of teach them. Is that a fair way of summarizing it?
Sometimes I'll actually write parts of it, but I still try to make them walk through it and understand it. I don't want to just here's this thing, run it, that, because then they just keep coming back, for help on it, and they don't really understand what it's doing. And some people it takes more time to do that. Some people just aren't inclined to do scripting for whatever reason, just like I'm not inclined to do, I don't know, SharePoint, Power BI. What do I complain about most? Qualis. But I'm not going to mention McAfee. But but when you get people moving, when you help them to get like on the treadmill and they go, and then it's nice when I don't hear from them for a few days. You kind of assume, okay, they got pulled off into something else. Sometimes they do. But other times they'd be like, oh yeah, I've been working on it. And they'll come back and show me. I had a really cool one. And this goes with customers too. And it's really cool with customers because it's billable time. But I had a customer who was asking me for help with PowerShell with Teams. And it was something really basic, like just posting to a channel. And then when they came back and showed me a month later, and what they had done was they had built this crazy contraption that basically it uses an Intune PowerShell deployment to call a REST interface to a Power Automate job that then calls their PowerShell to write something to Teams. And he took that and he modified it to do another thing on Teams, which was to go through voicemail and post the voicemail into Teams by doing a lookup of contacts. So he could actually grab the cell phone number, look up the contact, and post the name on there. And this guy had not written any PowerShell 2 months prior to that, never touched it. And he was just like reading docs and playing around and like spending up, late nights, and shows me this thing. And I'm just there with my mouth dragging on the floor, like, holy crap, man, this thing's like, it's awesome. It's not super elaborate. It's very, when you follow it, it's like, it makes sense. It's just, very simple, but it gets the job done. It has like 5 or 6 moving parts in it. And for him to figure that out, it's like, yeah, it's awesome. Long story short.
I feel like stated confidence in PowerShell follows a similar line of chess. You have people that are new to it that are very confident in their skills. And then once you learn a certain threshold, all of a sudden you realize everything you don't know. And I feel like there's always a big chasm. Like, so if someone says I'm really good at chess or PowerShell, they're either really new to it or genuinely fantastic, but you don't get a lot of people that are they're more in the valley part of there's so much to learn.
Yeah, and there's a lot of parts of PowerShell. That's probably the coolest thing about any language. So I've worked with a lot of programming languages over the years. I spent the longest time on Lisp, believe it or not. So I spent 15 years on that, and then moved into C++ and a little bit of Java, a few other things, then VB, VB5 at first, and then 6. And with all of them, the coolest thing about them is when there's more there than you know, because it's like a book that doesn't really end. It keeps going, right? So it's like, hey, I got more to learn. So I haven't reached the end of it. And PowerShell's like that. Like there's still parts of PowerShell I haven't ever touched, like tuples. I haven't used tuples for anything. I haven't used any of the new ands and ors that PowerShell 7 has, where you can do that sort of a coalesce type function. Like, if this is true, but you can do it in one line instead of having a if then else type thing. It looks cool, and I'm just like looking at it going, that looks really cool. What am I going to use it on?
Is that the ternary operators or? Yeah.
So it's stuff like that. So it's cool that those things are still popping up and they're still adding to it as they go. So I feel, there's like an onion layers. I feel real confident about a certain core part of it, and then as it goes out, less and less confident. But familiar, and then unfamiliar at the very edge, so yeah.
When you think of PowerShell scripting and that kind of core onion that you represent, and don't cut the onion or we might be brought to tears, but when you think of that, what are some kind of guiding principles that come to mind? And this doesn't have to be an exhaustive list of like, hey, here's everything you should keep in mind when but like, what are some? Is it like if working code works? Where does your mind kind of go when you think of those core PowerShell things?
Don't really think about them, honestly. I'm trying to solve a problem. Like I need to pull a bunch of data from somewhere. I'll just start writing the code. But I take that back. I guess the first thing I think of is like, okay, how many ways can I get to that data? And what's the most efficient way? What are my constraints? I'm really trying to keep on track here and figure out what my nickname is from. But like I had a customer, and this came from another coworker. Coworker pulled me into a project 2 months ago where they had to enumerate all the files on all their shares of all their servers across their enterprise. And it was hundreds of servers and thousands of shares, and almost all of them were running on 2008 R2 with PowerShell 2. So I start whipping out code. None of it works. Right? Like, where in? Oh, no, there's no in. Okay, all right, that's not going to work. And then start doing something else. It's like I kept just bumping into a wall everywhere I turn. Like, oh crap, that's only in 5 or that's only in 3. So there's that. There's like what and then stepping back and understanding where the boundaries are that you have to work within. So that taught me a lot. That really educated me on PS Script Analyzer. I'd never really paid attention to it, where you can set the rules for validating your code. That helped a lot. Helped me spot other places I had missed really quick. But I don't think that's real common. I think more often it's going to be dealing with like some application or data source that you're not familiar with. Like a common one is, hey, I need to get something in Graph. That comes up all the time. And then somebody says, I've never worked with Graph. They're unfamiliar with it. And Graph is kind of weird the first time you start messing with it. So the stuff that at the core of that onion would be like just your basic syntax stuff. Like, okay, do I want to do a loop here? When does a do while versus a while make more sense? But that stuff is really not tied to PowerShell. That's really kind of language. Sorry, man, my alerts are flipping out here. That goes across languages. I mean, you see that in almost any language. I mean, I would deal with that in Kix when I did Kickstart scripting years ago. VB and VB script, VBA, all that stuff. There was the same questions. When do I do this kind of thing versus that? And most of them are really basic structures. So if anybody hasn't written script at all, it doesn't really matter what language they learn as far as the basics are concerned, like understanding a for loop, because the for loops are pretty standard across most languages. There's some exceptions, but for I is equal to 0, I less than or equal to whatever, I plus plus. Those things, that's real common. For each is real common. While, do while, do until. I mean, some languages combine them different ways, but those same things are almost everywhere. So if you know one language, you can pick up another one a lot quicker. Even if the syntax looks really weird, you get used to it. Like going from Python to PowerShell or Perl. Once you know one, you can move back and forth. So knowing the basic stuff like that, you can move between languages or learn multiple. It's funny because in the 90s, I was working with multiple languages a lot. That was a weird time. Especially in sysadmin work, because you would deal with different applications that had like, okay, for that, you got to use this. And for this, you got to use that. There was no common. PowerShell's really smoothed a lot of that out. It really has added like this, an abstraction layer over a lot of things. You can talk to AWS and VMware with PowerShell. If you brought that idea to me 20 years ago, I would have said that was impossible. There's no way these vendors would do that. There was too much animosity, or at least looked like that. They would never cooperate. They'd probably build an active defense against it in some way. Like, we're not going to let that in here. Right. You saw a lot of that in the 90s and in the early 2000s. There was a lot more turf battles between products. And now it seems like there's a lot more cooperation. Not at all levels, but at least on the PowerShell side. I mean, PowerShell can get into so much stuff now that I would have never imagined it would be able to. Its reach, its amount of reach into different products. Oracle, Okta, Workday, and these are things I work with. SQL, MySQL. It's crazy. In fact, that's hard to find anything that you can't talk to with PowerShell unless it just can't be talked to at all. That's about it.
I feel like with almost any application anymore, part of the vetting process when you're looking for the right fit for you is, does it have an API or can you automate things? And where the demand for that's increased, the desire to have like an easier access to the how to use it has probably gone up with it.
Yeah. Even if it's not an official, sanctioned thing from the vendor, the community will come up with one. And there's a lot of modules out there and in the gallery for all kinds of things. Like one that came up like that falls right into that is Okta. So I was having to deal with Okta a lot as part of this customer's user onboarding and offboarding, and I could not find an official Okta PowerShell module anywhere. So I did find one, which is really weird. And I haven't checked to see if they've changed this or not. But when I was going to the Okta website and digging into their API docs, they had a link that said, "Oh, for PowerShell, go here." And that link went to a GitHub repo of one of their employees, which was kind of interesting. That's Microsoft's done that a few times, right? I guess I can throw his name out. Mike Niehaus. He's put some stuff out there that isn't wrapped completely in the Microsoft branding. It's still like sort of it's a community thing, use it at your own risk kind of thing, right? But the idea that they let them do that is cool, right? That's a whole different Microsoft than I knew 20 years ago. But the same with Okta, that they would link to an employee's personal GitHub from an official doc and say, here's the solution. And that was a module called Okta. There's another one called PS Okta. There's a bunch of them, but the one that was closest to what I needed was that one. And then I reached out to that guy and he moved on into managerial. So he's like some high up VP now and doesn't touch that anymore. So not sure where that's going to go. Hopefully it doesn't get killed because it's kind of useful.
Well, if it is on Git, as long as he, either he could give up control to someone that has access, or if someone goes in and makes a pull request, if all he's doing is reviewing code, and although that can be time consuming too. But
yeah, I mean, somebody can fork it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's in a public repo. There's always a chance that it will be maintained and kept alive anyway.
Yeah. Which is good. I mean, that's another new thing. A lot of things happen kind of not at the same time, but close enough together to kind of feed each other. So the whole GitHub thing. So years ago, if you talk to anybody about source control, they were talking, Visual Source Safe, and that was only for compiled programs. We don't do that for scripts. They're like, scripts are like for kids wandering out in the field. We do real programming. Remember, there used to be that divide between, is it compiled or not? If it's compiled, you can come in, but if it's not, sit outside, you're not getting in here. Yeah, there was a lot of those weird battles at the staff meeting table. My stuff's more important. Without networking, this company would crash. That's not true. Without storage, you wouldn't have any networking. And all that stuff. But that's been blurred. So the line between scripting and programming, nobody seems to bring that up anymore. The most you'll hear is like, is it C# or is it PowerShell? But it's not like an us and them. It's like, when does it make more sense? I guess backing out 20 steps, it's more cooperation, feels like, than it used to be, which is nice. But a lot of things you would never touch with a script are now like easy in reach. REST APIs, SQL, WMI, even subsystem calls, right? You can still do all that. You can do so much with PowerShell. It's crazy now.
You into Azure Functions?
I'm sorry?
Are you into Azure Functions at all? Because to me, that's another one of those like cool things.
I've dabbled with them a little bit. I haven't had an opportunity to go in full on them. So at MMS, there was a roundtable discussion on what's the future of cloud automation platforms, and that was probably the closest I saw where people was thinking, well, we use this because it's better for that, and then other one, well, that's not true. Ours is just as good, even if it can't do that. And it was between Azure Automation, Azure Functions, and Power Apps. That was kind of the three camps that sort of formed in that discussion. And I can't say if any of them are better. There's some trade-offs. Like, I'm more familiar with Azure Automation because I spend more time on that. That's not to say I'm saying it's better. It's just I'm more familiar with that. I do like that it has hybrid workers, so it makes it easier to work with on-prem stuff from the cloud, vice versa. And you can mix and match much more easily from what I hear. I don't know enough about Functions and Power Apps to know if that's true. But from the discussion they had then, that was back in May. Yeah, it was May. It didn't sound like they could do that with those other two, but they had other trade-offs that they could do better than Azure Automation. So it's another one of those things where Microsoft has like two things. One's really good at this and not so good at that, and vice versa. And then you're kind of stuck with, well, which one of these is going to be the future? And they kind of leave them both there for a while, like Azure AD Connect versus Azure AD Cloud Sync. That's another one, right? So, hey, this one only needs an agent. I don't need a whole server, and it can do multiple domains. Oh, but it can't write back devices. So you start submitting feedback, and it's like chirp, chirp. You don't hear anything. It's like, well, where's this going? So the internal joke we have is we say it's been scupped. Everybody remembers SCUP? I don't know. System Center Update Publisher. It's this tool that added on to Config Manager to publish third-party updates. It got left to die, and the forums, you can still find discussion forums out there. Hey, what's going on? Is this product going to have a life? We have third-party apps. This one of like 5 years, maybe longer. Not a response. Just dead. Laps is another one. Laps in the cloud. That's only recently, like in the last, May, they announced they're going to do one for Intune. There were a lot of people saying, hey, I use Laps all the time. Where's the counterpart to Laps when I go all cloud? Chirp, chirp, right? So there's that, right? So with the Power Apps thing and this automation stuff I was just blabbering about, with Azure Automation, there was a rumor they were going to deprecate Azure Automation, that it was considered old because its lineage comes from SMA, which comes from Orchestrator, I think. And the idea was like, it's not modern, it's not the new thing, the shiny chrome thing, like Power Apps and Functions. But then I heard they reversed course on that, which is good because we have a lot of things invested in that. So they pull the rug out from it. That's going to hurt pretty bad.
So it sounds like if you need a place to run your PowerShell, and you kind of go to Azure Automation, not Azure Functions. Is that pretty
for
much
me
right
now? Yeah, that's not to say that's the right way. It's just
right.
What I'm comfortable with right now. Yeah.
So it's rare that when something falls to the wayside that it does get a second life, like the remote desktop connection manager. That one was dead in the water for a security flaw.
Yep.
And then sysinternals saved it. So I'm always excited when I see something that had got to the wayside, make it back like that. But I think that's a rare case. You need someone internal that's like, I'm going to save it.
Yep. That was a good one. it's weird. The way they develop products is strange. I don't understand it from the outside. I've had some people explain to me how complicated their internal environment is, their organization structure, the fragmentation, the different programs, and how they merge and split programs and how it affects the products. And to me, it's like trying to follow politics or follow a soap opera. I can't really latch onto it, but I'm just watching it from the outside. It's like watching your neighbors fight through the window. You're like, I have no idea what they're fighting about, but man, that pan just flew by the window pretty fast. So that's kind of where I'm at. I'm on the outside looking at it. So what's going on here? How come they start this thing and never seem like they finish it? And it's like, and then I hear a story later. Oh, well, that's because of this. And they'll explain the situation. Like, okay, well, that makes sense, But to 99% of the people out there that don't get to hear that story,
it's easy to sit on the outside and say, why don't you keep maintaining this one thing that I love? It's probably not so easy inside to be able to save it when there's I guess not a big push for it. Yeah,
I mean, but the thing is, they repeat that a lot. Again, if they're watching this, I'm probably never going to get a job offer. But WSUS, that's another one. They have a huge following. MDT has a huge following. Doesn't seem it gets a lot of love. It's like, hey, it works. We're not going to touch it. It's sort of like that game curling, where they let the thing go and they just sit back and watch it go. It's kind of like that. Well, it's working. Not going to touch it.
I think Jordan knows about curling.
I know all about curling. I got a gold medal.
What's the stone? It's stone, right?
It's stone. Yep.
Stone. Yeah. So a lot of their products, especially if they've been around a while, I feel like they're the stone that gets let go. It's like it's got its life. It's going on.
I'm going to qualify that gold medal real quick. There was a tournament in Salt Lake City, is like a haunted house / curling tournament, and I won that, and they gave me a gold medal. It's not like a prestigious gold medal.
A haunted house curling event.
Yeah.
Huh.
You didn't realize you're in the presence of a champion curler.
Did you have a costume on?
I did not. No, I'm not one for that. Our skip was dressed as the Queen of Hearts. She went all in.
Oh, nice. Just trying to picture like somebody in a costume doing that. Yeah, I don't know. It's like, it's one of those things where I can armchair quarterback it to death. I could sit here and say, if I ran the company, I'd do it this way. But then you step in there and sit down and learn how everything works, and you're like, oh yeah, I can see why it doesn't happen that way.
Yeah, there's probably a lot of challenges related to distribution and just so many weird, wild issues that come with a place at that scale. And we kind of experience it even with kind of PowerShell, like as we're trying to make changes to how PowerShell updates are delivered and how we kind of push this. And occasionally we deliver modules on the box, and sometimes there's all kinds of stuff that even in the PowerShell world we're dealing with.
So you guys work together?
We do. Same company, different sides of the country.
Gotcha. Okay. And you're both in the United States?
Yep.
Okay. And
Florida for me.
Florida. Okay. And where are you?
Salt Lake.
Salt Lake. Okay. I just had a friend move out of there and moved to Florida. Actually went to Arizona and then Florida. Yeah, I'm out in Virginia. So it's kind of like a little bit like Florida, just not as crazy, not as many alligators or mosquitoes, and doesn't stay as hot. We only get a short amount of heat. So.
Yeah, Andrew was here talking a couple days ago about how cold it was, and it was like 70 degrees. And
we get colder. Yeah, yeah. My neighborhood gets really quiet around this time of year, so everybody leaves to head down there. So, yeah. So I don't know. My brain's swimming with thoughts right now. I need more coffee.
So what else about the coffee life? Where did the name Skatterbrainzz come from?
I joined, so I used to watch a show years ago. I don't know if anybody here would remember it, but Dig Nation. You guys ever remember that? Remember dig.com, digg.com? It was kind of a news aggregator of tech news and oddball stuff. Kind of like, I don't know how to compare that with other stuff out there. But the two guys that ran that, Kevin Rose and Kevin Albrecht, would do this show. They were kind of like their own, like their audience was like mostly college kids, and they would go to college campuses and they would do these shows on stage where they would drink beer and go over the news items of the day, and they would record it live. It was really cool. It was interactive. It'd be a lot of jokes and laughing and all that. And they would bring up like what's new, and that's where I first heard about Facebook in 2006, Twitter in 2006, and they were like, "Hey, check this out." And they would show it and they would play with it and in front of a live audience, and like nobody had heard of it. And so I signed on with those, and I was like, I need a handle. What do I want to call myself? And at the time, which I still do, I listened to a lot of Jeff Beck music. And he has a song called Scatterbrainzz, but it's SC instead of SK. So I put a K in there because, I don't know, had to be different. But yeah.
It's old school. That's leet speak, right? A little bit of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
In doing research for this episode, I was reading through your blog and I found out your son's a musician and you're a musician as well. Is that true?
I dabble. I'm not really. I'm a hobbyist, if anything. But he's a serious musician. He actually went to school for it, and he writes, and he's got a recording deal. So he got an advance to do some shows. So he's been traveling a little bit and writing songs for a publishing company. So he's doing pretty good. Yeah, he's taking off.
Yeah, I listened to it and I was digging it. I came back to it the day after I did my initial listen through. So
cool.
Very cool, man. It was awesome.
I'll let him know that. He'll be happy to hear that. He's about to move to Nashville, actually.
That's exciting. What's his musician name? We can look him up.
Steinza. So Steinza. And he's on Spotify and Apple and pretty much everything. But I think if you go to steinza.com, he's got like a hub page that links to everything.
Awesome.
Yeah. So he's pretty active. He's on Instagram and all that. He just played some shows, actually. But he went on tour up and down the East Coast with another musician named Matt Mason, who's pretty well known, at least on the East Coast. And he did part of that tour. Then when he got back, he took a break, and then he went out and played Nashville and just got back. And, now he's working. He works a day job to save up money in between, like cover his car and his equipment and stuff like that. So he does AV work for the hotels at the oceanfront. It's a lot of resort hotels. They do conferences and weddings, which is cool. So he gets to stay involved with running patch cords and doing AV equipment stuff. So it's all relevant, all ties together.
Yeah, that's very cool. I've met quite a few AV people who are also musicians. It's a nice combo.
Yeah.
But I think that you might win the award for person with the best child musician in the PowerShell community. So congrats on that.
Yeah, I mean, you're luck, man. I don't really take any claim to it. He did all that himself. He's doing really good.
What you mentioned not being a musician yourself. What do you dabble with?
Percussion. I took piano lessons years ago. I know my chords. I can't play any songs. I know chords and scales, Like I know I have a ratchet set. I don't know how to build anything with it. But when it comes to that side, drums, I played drums for like 20 years and kind of walked away from it when we started having kids way back. Our kids are all grown now. I did buy an electric kit, an Elisa's kit, and started playing that for a bit. And it was nice. Won't go down too far rabbit hole, but it helped me to unlearn a lot of the bad habits I had picked up because I was self-taught and I learned everything wrong. And you go back, thank God for YouTube, right? So YouTube's like, here's why you're not doing it right. And so I went back and, fixed my grip and fixed my stick rolls, my patterns, my paradiddles, footwork, just enough to know I could still do it. And then I kind of got to that same point I got to the last time, which was, now what?
Yeah.
And
yep.
It's not like a saxophone or a piano or guitar where you can go do something solo. With the drums, you got to have a band. It's like I just start thinking about all the bad things about bands that I went through. It's like having 5 girlfriends at once. Nobody wants the same song. Oh, I hate that guy. I'm not playing his music. I like it. And nah. So
I can definitely relate to that. I was a drummer who stopped with kids as well.
So, sometimes I think about getting a drum kit, not to learn it. I just want to, bother my wife with it.
Or get a good acoustic kit. Yeah, electric kits don't quite do it unless you have a big amplifier.
What you mentioned reaching with drums, where it's like, okay, you can play it, you got your stuff figured out. Now what? I get that a lot of times with hobbies, where it's like I get over the initial hurdle to be able to do it competently, and then I look at like the next level of competency, and it requires so much time for maybe not that much return on investment unless you make it make sense by like being in a band or really investing yourself in it.
Yeah, it's a fork in the road. It's like I don't have time to rehearse with a band and to play local gigs. If it's going to go anywhere, they're going to have bigger ambitions. They're going to want to go on tour, and I can't go on tour. So, I just get to that point where I'm seeing it early on. I'm like, yeah, it's probably not going to happen. It's like I can swing a bat, but I'm not going to play for the MLB. But it's fun. It is fun to play. I just got to a point where it wasn't as fun. Unlike PowerShell, which is never not fun.
Very true. Very true.
Because every time we get to the next level of proficiency, we look at the next step as like, yeah, it's worth the time.
Yeah, and there's always something new to use it on. So, yeah.
It really is. All right. You mentioned being in IT for a long time, dealing with some on-prem stuff. Do you ever look at event logs?
Oh, all the time.
What program do you use to open those EVTX files?
I don't usually do offloading. If they send them to me, I'll load them into Event Viewer and look at them just because it's handy. If I need to get something in real time, I tend to use PowerShell to do that just because it's, for me, easier to filter and sort and all that kind of stuff. But sometimes when I'm just on a hunt for something, like something could be wrong, I'll just go into Event Viewer and start poking around.
Why does Event Viewer take so long to open?
That's above my pay grade.
Yeah, that's an excellent question.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a good one.
It's the hard-hitting news right there.
Yeah. Why does Server Manager take so long to load?
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of slow ones out there. I don't know.
We talked to our previous guest, Stephen Judd. He's been in IT for a while. And I was asking about the differences between, how easy it is to just Google something really quick. Whereas back in the day, there weren't those same resources maybe. And his solution was just, you just had to RTFM. You had to read the documentation fully to understand things back in the day. Is that how you went about learning new things? Is just by, hey, pretty much got to just read through this document or book to kind of figure it out, and we can go from there?
If there was documentation. People take that for granted, but not to go really stupid old school, but I still remember on Unix when we got an undo command. Yeah, 1980s, at least on the Unix I was using, which was Intergraph or Computer Vision 4X back then. You'd load a part, take 45 minutes to open, and if you made a mistake and you had to close and reload it, took another 45 minutes. There was no undo. So we got undo. We're like, oh my God, there's an undo. So documentation wasn't always a thing. A lot of vendors treated it like that was their personal secret sauce, and they didn't want to share that. Early on, a lot of vendors had it behind, I won't say a paywall, but it would be behind a subscription wall. Like you had to be a paying, because some of them are still like that, right? Like you can't download some products like, Cisco AnyConnect, I think it is, or some of them are like that. There's some VPN clients, there's some forensic tools, there's some things like that where you have to be, you have to have an account to get into the site to download it, right? Some of them will let you see docs, but you can't get into their discussion forums. So there's different degrees depending on the client as to how paranoid they are about, their competitors stealing their data or what they're exposing. Can they use this against us, to steal how we do things? Microsoft's been really wide open because I think they feel more confident that they kind of own the landscape. They don't feel the same threats coming from anybody. So they're more open now than ever. And it depends on the product. Some products had better documentation, which is still true. I will say in the last, 2022, the last 3 years in particular, they have really stepped up the game on documentation. I mean, Microsoft used to kind of be in the background on that stuff, and now I would say they're at the front. They document very well.
We've talked to a lot of the people in charge, especially the PowerShell documentation, and I'm not surprised they're crushing it. Those people are awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I still complain every now and then about how some of the products don't use what to me would be an easy solution. Like they don't fill out the comments in their PowerShell, so when they do their auto docs, they don't have anything filled out. You just get the boilerplate stuff with no examples. That's common with like Config Manager. It's improving, but it's really slow. There's still a lot of commandlets that don't really say anything about what they do or how to use them. But other things like the Azure functions, most of the Windows stuff is pretty well documented. So yeah, but as far as like going back, and you were saying like, how did we learn it back in the day? Kind of like building a tent when you're camping. You had to find whatever you could and just go with that. So sometimes if you're lucky and you work for a big employer, you'd have a direct phone line to somebody. So I spent 20 years working in the Autodesk world. That was my thing, right? So I did a lot of CAD programming back in the day. I was an Autodesk developer and wrote software to do design automation. So I did that from like 87 till I think I finally stepped away from it around 2004 officially, even though that was already overlapping into traditional IT infrastructure type stuff by then. In those days, that was an example of back in the day, they didn't share their documentation wide open. And now they do. But back then, you wanted to look up how a function worked. You had to log into their site with an account that was a subscription member to the Autodesk Developer Network, and you had to pay for that. So the company I was working for was a big defense contractor, and to them, if you ever worked for a big defense contractor, the way they spend money is different than a lot of companies. It's like they don't think twice about certain things. Just like, oh yeah, go ahead, So I was lucky in that regard. So we had access to, the companies that eventually became Flexera back in the day. So I used to do FlexLM management. I did that for multiple products on Unix and Windows, managing licenses for CAD products for like several thousand users. Their documentation was behind a paywall for a long time. Stuff like that. So it's if you're just getting into IT today, you don't need to know all that. That's like, having to know how they make 2x4s when you just need to go buy them at Lowe's or Home Depot. And it's improved a lot, but there's really no way for anybody who's just coming into it now to understand how much that's improved. They'll see it in their time. I'm sure from now to whenever, they're my age, 85, and they're telling some 20-year-old, back in the day, we used to have to log into the cloud to do stuff. And by then, who knows what it'll look like. It looks like Minority Report, and they got their hands in the air. And, we can't imagine what the future is going to be like.
That's a life goal. I want to be the last person during Minority Report that remembers manually logging in.
It's like, I forget, there was some science fiction writer wrote, I'm sure somebody will go, yeah, that was so-and-so, but we live in ancient times. So every time we get excited about like this new thing, I just remember when VB Script was the new thing. And I remember when Windows NT, was the new thing, 4.0. And then Windows 2000, oh my gosh, it was the new thing. Right now, Azure, AWS, REST APIs, and who knows? Even 5 years from now, those things might be considered old. We don't know. We don't know what's around the corner. So I try to keep that in the back of my head that there's this tendency in IT, which is weird because our whole industry is built on change, right? Everything's about software. Software is about change, easy to change. That's the whole, what was his name? Charles Babbage, right? So I'm rambling. Idea was instead of having something that was machined out of something physical, you'd write it in software so you could make updates to it over time without having to retool everything. So our whole industry is built on constant change. And the first thing we resist is change. It's really weird. You hear about people like not wanting to learn a new language or move to a new OS platform or switch products. It's kind of like a weird double-edged thing that, we're all about change, but we don't want change, especially when you run into InfoSec, like you're not changing that, but I need to change it. No, you can't. So when you get excited about something new and think it's here to stay forever, none of the stuff's here to stay forever. I mean, back in the day, we thought, and I know it's going to sound like, some old man talking, but we really thought Windows and Novell were going to be around forever. We thought WordPerfect was going to be around forever. Lotus 1-2-3, Netscape, all these things that were just all around us all the time. We just felt like, oh, they'll be here forever. Well, Sun Microsystems, whole companies go away. So there's no way to know. And 20 years from now, it'll sound crazy, but Microsoft could be gone. Maybe it gets merged with another company and they have a new name. Who knows?
So I wouldn't say I'm resistant to change, but I am never or rarely an early adopter on something. Like, I don't want to spend a lot of my cycles learning something new that was just a flash in the pan. Which, I don't know, probably says something about my early retirement prospects as well. But
I think it sounds like the solutions that you would be testing out are not the solutions that you need. Like, I think earlier, Dave, you mentioned like Microsoft customers being like not beta testers, but like taking on new solutions that are for that specific use case as like a beta adopter. Like, that would be, I think, a good time to be on the cutting edge of things. But yeah.
I mean, I totally understand that. I mean, if it's something that falls, it's almost like driving down the highway and, something runs out in front of you. If it's running out in front of you and going the same direction you are, that feeling, you know what I mean? Like if somebody introduces a product that you go, that actually could make my life easier, then I'll give that an early adopter try. But if it looks like something unrelated, I'll just move on. But PowerShell was like that. When it first came out, it was Monad. And I dabbled with it, and I thought, I don't see a need for it. I was still tied to VB Script at the time, and VB Script did what I needed. And I don't know when the point happened, but a lot of people around me were like, you need to learn PowerShell. When the name changed. I remember when the name changed when it first came out. And I just kept thinking, what is it? What's different about it? And they kept saying, it's tied to .NET. And I was like, I did some ASP.NET. So I had this whole weird different perception of what it might be without actually looking at it. I really didn't understand it. It was hard. It was hard for me to make that jump because I didn't have my head opened at the right time to accept it like I should have. I think I'm a little better at that now. But yeah, it's that was another case where I didn't think I needed it, but I should have. Cases where something was early adopter, I jumped into Graph early on. The problem then was it didn't do enough of what I needed because not enough stuff was in there yet. It was really early. They were still kind of like feeling it out. Now it's it's like a snowball. It's just building and building. But yeah, I used to do a lot more early adopter stuff back in the early 2000s. I was on different. Hold on one second. I'm on a video call. Okay. I was on a lot of different. Back in the day, they call them beta programs for Google. I used to do them for Google. I did them for Alaire back when they did Cold Fusion. When I was doing more web development. So I was actually a beta tester for them. I was a beta tester for Microsoft on Visual InterDev and Front Page. I was also an early adopter of Windows Server 2003 and SMS 2003 when it came out. That was when they went from 2.0 to 2003. And several others. I used to do more but again, those things, they look like they fell in line with what I was doing at the time. So there was a lot more stuff going on that I didn't jump into, but there's a lot of stuff now I don't jump into because it doesn't look like it has anything to do with what I'm working on. So I have no idea where I'm going with that. I'm just rambling.
It's a constantly changing landscape for IT. You can't learn it all, but I don't know. I value my time a lot.
Yeah.
So until something's established, I'll tend to stay away from it.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I feel like it eats more of our time in our life than it used to. I felt like back in the day, you could step away from your job, but and even aside from the whole work from home thing that happened over the pandemic, I feel like work follows us home more than it used to, mainly because our cell phones, but I think that's probably the biggest part of it. Because even when they made us carry around BlackBerry phones, which they did for like 10 years, we had to carry those things around. It wasn't the amount of work following us that we have now. Things hitting us after hours. I'm hoping that finds a happy medium somewhere or pushes back a little, because I feel like I have so some of my kids work in IT, or my stepkids, not stepkids, what I call them, son-in-laws, and they're new to it. And so to them, it's normal that they're on their computer doing work on the weekends, or late after hours, late at night. And some of that's tied to what they're doing. So they're in cybersecurity, and that's a field right now that's burning people out. Just being honest, it's a fast-moving thing. I feel like it's a huge forest fire, and there's not enough volunteers jumping in. And then the ones that do jump in don't realize how big the fire is, and they don't realize how much time it takes to keep up with it. There's so many tools, so many platforms, so many trends to keep up with. It's great if you're younger, but at my age, I just don't feel like I can really keep up with it.
There's a lot of mindsets. So when you're first getting started, you want to stand out so you can move up quickly. So you're willing to make a lot. Like, I took a work-related phone call on 3 of the 5 days of my honeymoon, and my 10-year anniversary is coming up, and I can tell you that has not been forgotten. Where I'm at now, I'm a bit more established. I wouldn't take that call at all. So I think a lot of it is your motivation. Like, I was starting a new family, I needed to climb the ladder as fast as possible. But so I think there's a lot of what someone's willing to do. It shouldn't be that way. I mean, employees should be employees, but I kind of see where, especially people first diving into IT, might be more willing to spend their time.
No, that makes perfect sense. Yeah.
And I think that you're also describing like the whole burnout thing. Well, that's actually hurting employers, because they have employee spots there's spots that they can't fill. And if the things are too stressful and they're burning out their employees by not encouraging them to proactively set very healthy work-life boundaries, for no reason other than just because they want them to stay in the job longer. Like, you have to balance that so you don't get burnt out. And it can be, like, as humans, really hard, at least in my experience, to be proactive about not answering your phone when there's a culture of everyone works all the time. It can be like just human behavior. It's kind of hard to be the one outlier. So I think that a lot of the burden should fall on both employees, but also managers to like create healthy, lasting teams that get a lot of things done. But
yeah, absolutely. No, that's a good point. Maybe it jogged something in my head too about another issue that I see a lot of right now, which is companies are, I don't know if it's conscious or not, but they seem to be focused on hiring, even though they won't call it that, they want senior level people, and almost to the exclusion of junior level people, because they don't feel like they have the time to ramp them up, or the money to invest in ramping them up, or there's the worry that they ramp them up and they leave. But back when I first started in IT, which was a whole different world, like back then, nobody, I'm going to sound like an old man around a campfire. Most people I know didn't go into IT consciously or intentionally. Like, I'm going into IT. Most people I knew back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s kind of ended up in IT. They started out in something else, and they were already doing IT work, and then they just became IT. That's kind of how I got into it. So you had people that worked in HR, and they were running all the HR databases. When they formed a formal IT group, which there was a time where companies didn't have an IT department. And when they finally did form IT departments, a lot of times they were fragmented, right? Every office would have their own group that did IT. And then there was always these great migration projects we're going to unify the IT department under one CIO. And remember when the term CIO came out, it's weird. That they formalized a lot of jobs, right? It formalized a lot of titles. And job titles used to matter too back then. They don't seem to matter that much anymore. So analyst, engineer, architect.
I'll be honest, I don't even know what my job title is.
They're blurred. They're all over. I do remember and it wasn't very long. It seemed like a short time while an analyst analyzed, an engineer engineered, an architected, technician did technician work. And it was very distinct job descriptions. Okay, I don't do that. That person does that. and it worked in both directions. Like, I don't fix the servers. That's the engineer or the administrator, right? Or I don't go and put patch cables in. That's the technician's job. And you would hear that in the office. Somebody would walk up and say, I need you to run down there and plug this tape in. Well, I don't do that. That's the database tech or the backup tech. He does that. He or she does that. And now it's blurred because they started blurring titles like a programmer analyst. Okay, well, what's that? I analyze and program? Yeah, okay. Then you start seeing job descriptions on LinkedIn. It's like you got to know everything. And they list almost every product there is, and you have to have more years of experience than the product's even been around, right? So there's that. But in InfoSec, that's a new field, and they still expect people coming out of the gates to have like this whopping amount of experience. I'm like, it hasn't been around that long. Not like databases or other things. It's new. A lot of the tools are new. How long has Microsoft's Azure Sentinel been around? Not 20 years, right? So, but they want somebody who's got like 10 to 20 years experience. So I am seeing some companies having to stop and regroup and ask themselves, how do we address this? What do we do? There's not enough people applying, or they don't have enough senior people. So they're trying to figure out how to go back to those, mentorship programs, apprenticeship programs. Like, I started in the shipbuilding industry when I was doing the defense work stuff, and they actually had apprenticeship. They still do. They have an apprentice school, and they have a whole program deal towards, bringing in somebody from knowing nothing, like a boot camp, up to being able to function and be completely a member of the team doing advanced work. And it works great, but it takes investment. It takes buy-in from all the way at the top. A lot of companies don't want to do that.
Yeah, and I think that they need to approach things from that more of like, we're developing a security system, a sustainable security system where we are healthy enough to be able to take someone with very low amount of experience, give them appropriate tasks, educate them so that they can, be productive members of our team. You can't just expect to just put a bunch of smart people together and things to work. And you got to approach things from taking ownership of the fact that you're creating a system that might be burning people out, that might be giving them way like an unreasonable amount of responsibility. I wish we would do more of that.
I don't know. Sometimes I look at this and I wonder, are we like in the middle of some big transition that we can't see until it comes out the other end? It kind of feels like that.
So apprenticeship is still strong in skilled labor, like electrician, plumbing, things like that.
Yeah.
But within the tech field, it's not there near as much.
No. And I think a lot of employers assume colleges and schools will do that, but they're not focused on the same priorities. They're focused on getting you out the door with a piece of paper.
I have never used my degree.
Me either. I'll probably never pay that off.
I imagined it helped me get my foot in the door, maybe, but I can't prove that. I just assume.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. And I've talked to other people in the same boat. They ask me, was that degree worth it? I'm like, got me on an interview, but as far as like functional, no. Yeah. But
what I enjoyed about college was just critical thinking, more like learning how to approach things. And like, just as a young adult, for me, that was super helpful to know that there were these systems out there and, whatever. But outside of that, as soon as I got an interview for IT, I've just focused on being in IT and doing well.
Yeah. I mean, it's got other benefits, but as far as like day-to-day at the job, I suppose there's jobs out there that do use it, but I haven't run into them. But yeah, as far as apprenticeship goes, I feel like the time's coming. I don't know. Again, I mentioned transition. Like, are we in the middle of something we can't see? That it's in the middle of like the cloud, right? Cloud was. God, now it feels like I look back, I'm like, holy crap, we have been in the cloud now for over 10 years, and it felt like for a long time we'd only been in it for 2 or 3. Time kind of like slips and like sudden movements. It's like. How often you say, oh, that was only 2 years ago. Then you look at the calendar and you go, oh, no, wait, that was 7 years ago, right? The pandemic.
I think the general understanding that the cloud just means someone else is hosting it is there instead of it just being a magical thing.
There is that. There is that. But there is a lot of layers on the cloud, right? The whole API aspect to it, right? So there is that. But there's also the idea of Microsoft saying, we'll take care of that for you. That's another trend that I see going on where they're taking more and more things out of the hands of the customer for a trade-off, of course, you pay us a little bit more and we'll take care of that for you. Like auto patch or auto manage is a good example. That's just like a poke in that direction. Like, oh, you're tired of dealing with patch management? We can do that for you. Just put your credit card in. And stuff like that, right? So same with onboarding and offboarding. It's like Workday, PeopleSoft, Microsoft has, what's it called? The new lifecycle stuff in Azure AD. Oh my goodness, I forget the name. They just released it. It's like they have these recipe templates you can drag and say, here's for hiring a user, here's for terminating a user, stuff like that. Again, taking things off your plate for a nominal fee, of course, right? But where's that going to end up in 5-10 years? I wonder that. It's like you look at GitHub Copilot. I'm trying to stand back and look at this stuff like, here I am, the 90-year-old guy looking at it going, oh, okay, I've seen this before. This is going in that direction. This company's going to end up like Novell. But it seems to me like the goal, which makes sense, is to automate as much of it as possible. But where does that leave people who work as the in-between? I kind of do worry about that, especially for people who are just getting into IT and they're going to map a future out. I'm sure that's going to take a long time to happen. They're not probably in any danger like in the next 10, 20 years, but I don't know. Maybe I'm worried about something I shouldn't be worried about. But
yeah. I think it's interesting that you mentioned that, are we in the middle of something, a transition, some kind of thing? And, I don't know anything, but from what I'm hearing, it kind of sounds like we are a little bit, just based on your experience, where back in the day, no documentation, no this or that. Now we look at things like Microsoft Learn, I think is what it's called, where there's like labs and there's education and there's thousands of people whose job is to focus on documentation. And a lot of times the big companies, what they do trickles down. And I think that Microsoft is doing a lot of empowerment, a lot of like embracing change, a lot of not blaming people. And it's interesting to see that trickle down to organizations, because I think there's still a lot of organizations that are very, like they haven't adopted many DevOps principles. Like they're kind of living in the dinosaur age still. And as we can get more and more, the landscape of security, I feel like, is going to get a whole lot better. Even if it's just sysadmins doing a better job, embracing PowerShell more, being more efficient, and kind of learning these skills over time. But it's cool to see, because I don't, it's hard to see where we are in any kind of transition and how fast things are going to pick up.
Yeah. And you brought up DevOps. I've got a lot of thoughts around DevOps, some good, some not. But like, look at what's happened just with ARM going to people jumping to Terraform and then jumping to Bicep. There's still evolutions going on there, right? It's still evolving. Who knows where that's going to be in 5 years. In 5 years, everybody says, 5 years, not much is going to change. Well, look back 5 years. A lot changed since 2017. It's quite a bit different world. Yeah. But I think, go ahead. I'm sorry.
It's interesting to see what Microsoft is doing by making things accessible to organizations with maybe like one or two sysadmins. Like there's a lot of kind of sort of pre-built solutions that'll get you in a much better spot really quick. And to me, stuff like that is the only, or one of the only ways to really get security everywhere. It's to make it super easy, approachable, and hopefully we see more and more trends like that, to where someone can be newer in security and start contributing in a way that doesn't require a ton of context knowing.
Yeah. A good example of that is, and this comes up all the time with customers, they'll go look at their secure score in Azure. And they're like, why is it I just spun this up and it's already insecure? Why don't they spin it up out of the box secure, since they already know the rules? I'm like, I'm sure that's coming. It's probably on a roadmap. It's on somebody's whiteboard somewhere. I know it is. So that's another thing in transition. I feel that it's not going to be so much build it and then patch it right away. It'll be patched as you build it. And then eventually, I feel like we're in a 1.0 still, or we're like at a 1.1 stage overall. That's what it feels like. Again, I'm not an expert. I don't know really what I'm talking about. But I feel like when it gets to 2.0, it's going to be a little bit more keeping up with what we need versus us having to keep it up. Like patching is a good example, but application updates, they're still a pain. OS upgrades are still a pain. For physical devices, drivers are still a pain, and they're working on all those things from different angles. I feel like when it gets to what it feels like as a 2.0 is when it'll be, those things will not be as painful. They'll be an afterthought. We tell people about how bad they used to be, right?
We've seen some progress in that, like feature upgrades. Now there's a lot of them where it's a quick upgrade where it's more enabling features that are already there. So occasionally you move up to a new subset and that feature upgrade is massive, but then the next couple is a much quicker and easier process.
Yeah, like an enablement package. But then again, they kind of didn't follow that with Windows 11. So I don't know. I guess they had their reasons, but I still feel like they just need to. I bring this up with CI/CD all the time. That everywhere I run into CI/CD just seems to be like a constant conveyor belt of a broken bottle coming down. I'm like, all right, just because it's constant doesn't mean it's better. Slow down the conveyor belt. Make sure that more of the bottles come down with the caps on them and the labels on right. And my big complaint is they start something, and I understand why from the back end, but from the user end, I have to look at it from that end because that's where I am. Is they'll start something, it's almost there, but it needs a few more things to make it really useful, and it never gets there because they've already moved on to the next shiny thing. You know what I mean? It's like, I just feel like there needs to be a top-down, hey, let's not start the new thing unless we have to because somebody is literally beating our gate down to take our fort. I mean, I hear that argument all the time. They have to do it because they have to be proactive against the competition. Well, who's really competing with them on a lot of stuff? I mean, I don't know. Maybe they perceive things different than I do, but I don't really feel like from talking to customers, they have as much competition in certain areas as they think they do. And I think they could slow down a few things and spend more time tightening the bolts and then moving on. They'd have happier customers. If they had waited just this might be a bad example, but if they waited a few months to release an update to Intune, and just added more of the stuff that are still sitting out there on the wish list and feedback and user voice forums and all over Twitter and Reddit, you'd have happier people. Like, oh, hey, you guys fixed that thing. Instead of, oh, it's still coming. It's still coming. Because we had to add this new thing that you really don't use, but it looks cool on the marketing slide. Man, they're going to hate me. Microsoft's going to probably send a white van out to take me out. But overall, I'll say one thing. I love what the company's doing. I have to say they've modernized a lot of things, and no, they're not threatening to kill me right now. I just, how it is. It's like the water boils now in 5 minutes instead of 15, but now you want it in 1 minute kind of thing. So I have no idea.
No, you're definitely right on that. And it definitely seems like they embrace that change. They definitely post products that are in a MVP state, it seems like, and us as the customers, like Jordan, you're mentioning it earlier with like learning on, being an early adopter to some new services can be a very frustrating experience, I found.
Let's tie it back to PowerShell. I had one last week that I'm still dealing with right now. So I went from 7.2.7 to 7.3.0 and it broke a bunch of my stuff. So a bunch of my Azure my Connect AZ account automations acting weird. They still work fine in PowerShell 5.1, same code, but in 7.3, when they open up the browser to do the authentication, they go to localhost port 8400 and say, bad method call or something. They don't go through. And I've tried on different machines. It's like, okay. And then I read up on the docs. It said, yeah, there's some known issues with authentication. I'm like, okay, great. So my recourse was to roll back to 7.2.7 to get those to work, which I did. It was a little clunky, but I got it to work. But the whole split thing between PowerShell 5.1 and 7, that's another one where I feel like I'm not sure if, I don't know. I don't know which is better.
So that one, I understand where they're coming from because Windows PowerShell was for Windows and they were trying to make it cross-platform, which is a logical step. So 6-core was good, but PowerShell 7 is definitely the spot to be. I see why they wanted to make a hard cut between 5 and 7 just because cross-platform is the future.
Yeah.
And I think at least on that one, they did a pretty good job of getting I mean, not 100% of the usability, but a large percentage of it.
Yeah, and it does great on Linux. I mean, I've been testing it on Linux for a while, and there's some things it doesn't do, but it does a lot of the common stuff. There's still some things I haven't tested with it yet that are on my list to test. But as far as like what ships out of the box, it's frustrating to me. And again, I know I'm beating up on them, but I install a brand new copy of Windows 11 and fire it up, and what's on it? PowerShell 5.1. And what's within that PowerShell 5.1? PowerShell Get 1.0. Like, come on, guys, I'm buying a 2022 truck. I don't want 2018 wheels on it. It's like, we just get it out the factory with the latest stuff. It's supposed to be the shiny new product, right? So I don't know. Maybe I'm expecting too much. Maybe I'm barking up the wrong tree, but it just feels like they need to clean that up. I feel like it should come out the door with PowerShell 7 on it. Maybe not 7.3, but whatever the latest GA is when it comes out. Like when they come out with the next annual release, if they're going to stick to the annual release, if they can stick to that cadence of Windows 11, maybe it should come out the gate with the latest PowerShell in it, so that also you don't have to worry about, now we have to deploy the new PowerShell.
I think for that, though, it would have to come out of the gate with .NET Core as well, instead of just the normal .NET framework, which is, I'm not sure. I don't know enough about what goes into all of that.
Yeah, so I don't know. So I don't know if they created a worse mess for themselves by fixing one problem and making another. I don't know. It's out of my area, but again, I could be completely wrong. I have been before.
Well, are you ready for the common parameters, the 3 questions that strike fear into all of our guest hearts?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. First question. What is one time something went wrong while on the job, and what did you end up learning from that?
One time something with PowerShell or with anything?
Anything.
Oh, anything? Oh, accidentally deleting a database. That's a good one. All the usual stuff. If you work with System Center, there's somebody who's deployed an image to every machine in the environment. That's happened. Just accidentally doing something that you didn't mean to do. So then you have the common list of things. Have a test environment. Don't do it on a Friday. Don't do it at the end of a long day when you're tired. And make sure that there's somebody else to look it over before you do it. That's saved me more times than I can count. Say, hey, you missed that. If you'd have run that would have blown up and taken out that whole village. And it's like, oh, good thing I didn't do it. So yeah, test environment, super important. A lot of people think it's got to be some elaborate thing, but no, just a couple of VMs on Hyper-V or VMware or VirtualBox, whatever you're happy with, doesn't really matter. As long as you can make it close to the environment, do it. And there's a lot of tools out there to make that easy. A lot of them are PowerShell. Like a good one. Sorry if I'm digressing here, but had to do a lab environment mock-up for an Active Directory automation process I was working on for a customer that was all PowerShell. Was to use another PowerShell module to copy their data, their domain structure into the test environment. So it export like all the OUs, the GPOs. And then you could also select certain OUs to extract the accounts, and you would put your own password on them, of course. So nothing sensitive got pulled out. So just enough to build a mirror image of that environment, so you could test it in there. Same domain, fabricam.com, and do your testing and then go forward. That way you kind of know, hey, at least I tested it very close to the real thing versus in my Contoso lab, and yours looks entirely different. Have a test environment. Don't do stuff on a Friday unless you have to. So if it's a planned outage, like you're going to do a weekend migration, that's fine. But if it's just you and you're like, I'm going to roll this upgrade out, think through. Again, I learned these the hard way. It's not like I've never done these. I've done them. Just think through what the ramifications will be if it goes wrong. And whatever time you expect to fix it, double that time. Something else always creeps in, right?
That is some new advice. That's probably a fantastic idea, is actually plan for fixed time.
Yeah. Have a rollback plan. They used to push that in us all the time, all the way back to the when I first started was, what's the rollback plan? You'd be sitting at a change board meeting. What's the rollback plan? And I always thought, it's like some formality, a TPS report, but it's a real thing. Really have a backout plan. If you can't build it into what you're making, at least build a separate thing that can help you do that. And whatever's easiest. And don't assume, oh boy. So failures, another failure. Don't assume you have to build from scratch. That's a big assumption I fall into. Now it's a conscious thing. When I go to tackle a problem, I'm like, has somebody else done it? And then don't just grab it and use it. Look at it, go through it, and understand what they're doing and why they're doing it. Because sometimes you'll find 2 or 3 or a dozen, and you'll find that one of them does something way better than the others. But that time that you take doing that not only educates you, like, oh, wow, they're using an array list instead of an array. Oh, I see why they did that. Oh, okay, cool. I'm learning from it at the same time as I'm figuring out a solution that's already been done and tested, saving me time of having to go through all the bumps of trying to do that myself and failing until it gets it right. So there's that. And even if you do build something, borrow what you can. So there's a lot of modules out there that'll do tons of the work that you need to do. So you can just glue. I've done a lot of solutions where I just glue things together. I do very little real code. The rest of it's borrowing from modules. Well, I'm not going to get ahead of myself. There's a lot of modules out there that are real popular. And you can borrow, features out of them to save you a ton of time. So that's another one. Don't assume you have to build everything. What else did I say? Have another pair of eyeballs, look it over. I mean, kind of common sense stuff. I mean, but yeah.
As long as you learn from the mistakes, you're good to go. All right, second question.
He gave us some. He already gave us
already gave it
one tip. He gave us several tips.
All right, there we go.
That knowledge, right?
All right, then we're down to the third question. What's your 3 favorite modules in PowerShell?
Ooh, import Excel. Doug Finke. I love that one. DBA tools. I use that a lot. It's Chrissy Lemaire and I forget the other guy's names, but there's now it's a bunch of people. Carbon. And depending on what I'm doing, there's some that I use just for very specific things. Selenium is good. Plat EPS. I use that for doing my markdowns. And then for day-to-day, there's a whole bunch of Microsoft ones. The AZ stuff, the Graph stuff, Exchange Online Management, Azure AD, Graph Intune, PNP PowerShell. And there's ones my friends have written or my colleagues, like PS Notes, PS Dates. So I know I went way over 3, didn't I? The math is terrible.
That's what's good about PowerShell, though, is there's so much customization that can go into it.
PS Windows Update. That was one I mentioned on Twitter the other day. That's number 2 on the PS Gallery download list after years. It's still in the top 5, if not at the number 1, almost every week.
If it's good, it's good.
Yeah.
You're muted, Andrew.
I feel like a lot of people have automation that just installs that on targets every single time it runs.
Yeah, pretty much.
So yeah. I wasn't sure if you were aware of this, Dave, but you've been in the presence of a transcendent talent. Andrew Pla is the world's foremost authority on all things shilling. And we get the privilege to stand back and watch a master of his craft just weave some magic. Take it away, Andrew.
All right.
Thank you so much, Jordan. That was a very fitting explanation. And you know what? Today I brought the razzle dazzle. My daughter painted my nails over the weekend, Thanksgiving weekend, and I didn't realize until I took a sip on camera and just see this pink hand holding it. So I did that for the show, friends.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and give us 5 stars on your podcast platform of choice. PowerShell to the people, you know what I'm saying? Tweet us at PowerShellPod, or you can email us, PowerShell@pdq.com. Thank you so much to our amazing guest. Where can we find you?
Usually in my chair. I don't leave it enough. On Twitter, Skatterbrainzz with 2 Z's on the end. SK WordPress, Skatterbrainzz, WordPress. I'm on a lot of stuff. I'm on Mastodon now too. I'm on InfoSec Exchange. Yeah, that's it.
So that's Skatterbrainzz at infosec.exchange for the Mastodon one.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm out there. I mean,
All right,
if anybody wants to find me.
fantastic. Yeah, we'll leave links everywhere so people can find you. Thank you so much for taking time to talk to us. This was a fantastic conversation.
Thank you guys. I'm honored. I really appreciate you asking me to do this. Really.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the PowerShell Podcast with your hosts, Jordan Hammond and Andrew Plough.
He's a troublemaker. He's a rabble-rouser.
The PowerShell Podcast is a production of PDQ.com, making device management simple, secure, and pretty damn quick.